Welcome back, everyone, to a new story. We really hope you enjoy it. What the hell? Why am I in a woman's body, wrapped in latex? The words were a choked gasp, swallowed by the oppressive darkness of my bedroom. They weren't even my words. Not really. The voice that spoke them was too high, too breathless. It echoed strangely, as if filtered through something. My own voice, the one I'd had for 28 years, was a low baritone, a comfortable rumble in my chest. This was a panicked soprano. My first sensation was constriction. A terrible, unyielding pressure was wrapped around my entire body. It felt like I was being squeezed from all sides by a giant, heated python. My chest ached with every breath, each inhalation a shallow, desperate struggle against a force that was crushing my ribs. My waist felt impossibly tight, cinched to a degree that felt medically unsafe. A sticky, uniform heat clung to every inch of my skin, trapping my own body warmth and turning my form into a personal sauna. I tried to move, to sit up, but my limbs felt sluggish and alien. My hands, when I brought them up to my face, were wrong. They were slender, delicate things, ending not in my usual short, clean nails, but in long, blood-red talons that scraped against the material covering my face. A mask, a hood. It was tight, seamless, and terrifying. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the groggy haze of sleep. This was a nightmare. It had to be. One of those vivid, stress-induced dreams where everything feels real until you finally tear yourself awake. I squeezed my eyes shut, then forced them open again. Nothing. Still dark, still trapped. My heart hammered against the cage of my ribs, the frantic rhythm muffled by the layers of whatever I was wearing. I tried to push myself up again, this time with more force. My arms trembled under a new and unfamiliar weight. My own chest felt heavy, two soft, substantial mounds pressed against my torso, their weight shifting as I moved. I reflexively brought my slender hands up to touch them. Through the slick material, I felt the unmistakable shape of breasts, full, soft, and utterly, horrifyingly not my own. A wave of nausea washed over me. I wasn't just wearing something strange, my entire body was wrong. This wasn't my flat, muscular chest. These weren't my broad, strong hands. This was someone else's body. A woman's body. My legs were just as foreign. They were encased in the same tight, rubbery material, which I now recognized with a dawning dread as latex. My thighs felt thick and soft, pressed tightly together, and the material extended all the way down to my feet, which were forced into an agonizing, unnatural angle. I wiggled my toes and felt them crammed into a narrow point. My heels were elevated, lifting me onto the balls of my feet. High heels, insanely high heels. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled desperation, I managed to swing my legs over the side of the bed. My feet met the floor with an unsteady clack of hard plastic on wood. Standing was a monumental effort. My balance was completely off. The heels felt like stilts, maybe 6 inches high, and my ankles wobbled precariously with every slight shift in weight. I felt like a newborn foal trying to stand for the first time, all trembling limbs and terrified uncertainty. I took a shaky step, then another, my hands outstretched in the darkness like a blind man. The sound of my movement was bizarre, a series of soft, squeaking sounds as the latex on my thighs rubbed together, punctuated by the sharp, punishing clack-clack-clack of the heels on the hardwood floor. My destination was the bathroom. I needed a mirror. I needed to see what was happening to me. My hand fumbled along the wall, the long nails scraping against the paint, until I found the familiar cool brass of the doorknob. I turned it and pushed the door open. The bathroom was just as dark as the bedroom. My hands searched for the light switch, my fingers trembling so badly it took me 3 tries to flip it. The sudden burst of fluorescent light was blinding. I flinched, shutting my eyes against the glare. When I opened them again, I wished I hadn't. Staring back at me from the vanity mirror was a monster, a fantasy, a nightmare. It was a woman, or a creature shaped like one, encased from head to toe in glossy, black leopard print latex. A skin-tight hood covered her entire head, with 2 perky cat ears sticking up from the top. The face was a mask of perfection and terror. The eyes, which I recognized with a sickening lurch as my own, were framed by dramatic, smoky eyeshadow and thick, black eyeliner drawn into a sharp cat-eye wing. My irises, usually a plain hazel, seemed darker, almost black, wan with sheer horror. Her lips, full and pouty, were painted a vibrant, glossy scarlet. The body was a caricature of femininity. A brutal-looking corset was visible even through the catsuit, cinching her waist to an impossibly small circumference and pushing the large, round breast upwards, creating a deep, shadowed cleavage. The latex clung to every curve, outlining wide, flaring hips and a rounded rear. Her legs were long and shapely, encased in the same leopard print pattern, ending in those fetishistic platform heels that looked more like weapons than footwear. I lifted a hand to my face, and the reflection did the same. The red-nailed fingers touched the glossy red lips, and I felt the sensation on my own. This wasn't a costume draped over my body. This wasn't a dream. That woman in the mirror, that latex-clad cat woman, was me. The scream that had been building in my throat finally ripped its way out. But it was her voice that filled the small room, a high, terrified shriek of utter disbelief. The shriek died in my throat, leaving only ragged, panicked breaths that fogged up the inside of my mask. My mind was a whirlwind of denial and pure, unadulterated terror. This can't be real. It's a hallucination. I ate something bad. I'm having a psychotic break. I clung to these rationalizations like a drowning man grasping at straws. But the evidence of my senses was overwhelming. I could feel the brutal tightness of the corset squeezing the air from my lungs. I could smell the faint, rubbery scent of the latex, mixed with a hint of perfume I didn't recognize. I could hear the constant, subtle squeak of the material with every tiny movement, and I could see her. My gaze was locked on the stranger in the mirror. Hesitantly, I reached out again, this time to explore the body that was now mine. My gloved fingers, which felt both connected to and disconnected from my brain, trembled as they traced the new contours of my form. I started with my chest. I pressed gently against one of the breasts. It was soft, yielding, and felt shockingly real. There was a weight to it, a natural heft that moved and settled as I prodded it. A wave of vertigo washed over me. This wasn't silicone padding stuffed into a suit. This felt like flesh and tissue, my tissue. My hands slid downwards, over the rigid boning of the corset that was digging into my new soft stomach. My waist was so small I felt I could almost wrap my hands around it. It was the waist of a doll, not a human being. Below that, my hips flared out in a dramatic, perfect curve. I ran my hands down my thighs. They were smooth, powerful, and undeniably feminine. The muscles felt different, shaped for a different kind of movement. Every touch sent a confusing jolt through my nervous system. It was a bizarre mix of body horror and a strange, unwelcome spark of something else. Curiosity, fascination. It was sick, but I couldn't stop. I was a scientist discovering a new and terrifying species, and the specimen was my own body. The sound of the latex was a constant companion to my exploration. A soft shh as my thighs brushed, a high-pitched squeak as I bent my arm, a low groan as the material stretched over my hips. It was the soundtrack to my imprisonment, a constant reminder of the shell I was trapped in. It was suffocating, but it was also strangely intimate. The material was so close, so perfectly molded to my new skin, that the sound felt like it was coming from inside me. My heart was still pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm, a drumbeat against the inside of my latex prison. My breathing was shallow and fast. I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my temple, trapped between my skin and the hood. The heat was becoming intense, a humid, claustrophobic environment that was entirely self-contained. And then, something shifted. As my hands continued their horrified, fascinated exploration, tracing the curve of my own hip, a strange warmth bloomed low in my belly. It was an alien sensation, a tingling that spread through my limbs and made my breath catch in my throat. My mind screamed at me to stop, to recoil in disgust. But my body was responding in a way I couldn't control. The friction of my latex-gloved hand against my latex-clad thigh created a strange vibration. The pressure of the corset, the agonizing arch of my feet in the heels, the sheer sensory overload of it all. It was coalescing into something new. The terror was still there, but it was being twisted, warped into a perverse form of stimulation. My fingers stilled, I stood frozen in front of the mirror, watching the Catwoman's chest rise and fall in short, sharp gasps. The warmth in my abdomen intensified, coiling and tightening until it was an ache, It felt both good and horrifyingly wrong. I was being violated by my own body, seduced by the very prison that held me captive. "No, stop it, this isn't you," my mind pleaded. But the body wasn't listening. It was an instrument tuned to a different key, and someone, or something, was playing a song of pure, unadulterated sensation. The feeling crested, a wave of heat and light that washed over me, making my knees buckle. A low moan escaped my painted lips, a sound of pure, involuntary pleasure. My back arched, pressing my breasts forward, my red-nailed hands gripping the edge of the bathroom counter for support. The world dissolved into a white-hot flash of sensation that was completely untethered from my consciousness. It was a purely physical event, an electrical storm in a nervous system I no longer recognized. When it was over, I sagged against the counter, my entire body trembling. The aftermath was a hollow, echoing silence in my mind. The pleasure vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving behind a thick, cloying residue of shame and self-loathing. I stared at the reflection, at the creature with the flushed face and heavy-lidded eyes, and I felt a surge of revulsion so powerful it made me gag. What had just happened? How could my body react that way? It was a betrayal of the deepest kind. It wasn't just that my form had been stolen, my very responses, my most primal instincts, had been rewired. I had just found pleasure in my own horror. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and useless. They streamed down my cheeks, but they couldn't escape the hood. They just pooled against my skin, warm and salty. Another layer of moisture in my suffocating prison. I wasn't just trapped in a woman's body. I was trapped in a body that seemed to enjoy its own transformation. And that realization was more terrifying than the latex, the corset, or the 6-inch heels combined. The wave of shame subsided, replaced by a cold, hard spike of desperate resolve. This had to end. This suit, this costume, this nightmare, it had to come off. Now. My rational mind, which had been temporarily short-circuited by panic and a bizarre rush of hormones, kicked back into gear. Every costume has a way out, a zipper, a line of buttons, a series of hooks and eyes. It was just a matter of finding it. I turned away from the mirror, unable to look at that stranger's face any longer. I started with my back, twisting my body as best I could in the constricting outfit, craning my neck to try and see. The latex was smooth and unbroken. My hands, still clumsy and unfamiliar, patted down my spine, from the base of the hood to the small of my back. Nothing. No telltale bump of a zipper pull. No seam where one might be hidden. It was just a continuous, sleek surface of leopard print rubber. Panic began to bubble up again, but I pushed it down. Be methodical. Alex, I told myself, my old name a comforting mantra in my head. Think like an engineer. I moved to my wrists. Surely there would be zippers there to allow the hands through. I ran the fingers of my right hand over the inside of my left wrist. I felt for a seam, a flap, anything. The material was bonded perfectly, flowing from my forearm to my hand as if it were a single, molded piece. It was the same on the other wrist. My fingers were trapped in these red-nailed gloves. My ankles I bent down, a difficult and precarious maneuver in the towering heels, my balance wavering dangerously. I felt around my ankles, my calves, the backs of my knees. Nothing. The latex flowed seamlessly into the structure of the high-heeled boots, as if they were grown from my very legs. My frantic search grew more desperate. I ran my hands up and down my sides, over my stomach, along the inside of my thighs. The only seam-like lines I could feel were the hard, rigid bones of the corset, which was clearly underneath the catsuit, a second layer of imprisonment. But the catsuit itself, it was like a second skin, a perfect, unbroken shell. The hood. I had to get the hood off. If I could just see my own face, my own hair, maybe this whole illusion would shatter. I brought my hands up to my neck, my long nails scraping against the glossy surface. I hooked my fingers under the chin and pulled, hard. A searing pain shot through my jawline. It wasn't the pain of a tight costume pulling on my skin. It was the pain of my skin itself being pulled. I cried out, a sharp yelp of pain, and let go. I touched the spot under my chin tenderly. It throbbed with a raw, stinging ache. I tried again, slower this time, trying to find an edge, a seam where the hood met my neck. There was none. The material of the hood simply became the skin of my neck. I tried to peel it back from my hairline, digging my nails in. Again, a sharp, tearing pain, as if I were trying to rip my own scalp off. This wasn't a suit. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from my already constricted lungs. This wasn't something I was wearing. This was something I had become. The latex wasn't on my skin. It was my skin. My breath hitched, turning into a series of strangled sobs. I stumbled back to the sink, my legs trembling uncontrollably. I gripped the cool porcelain, my knuckles white under the black latex. I stared into the mirror, at the painted perfect face of the Catwoman, and saw the raw terror in my eyes. The makeup. Maybe the makeup was just makeup. If I could wash it off, if I could see my own skin underneath, even just a tiny patch of it, it would prove I was still in there somewhere. With fumbling, desperate movements, I turned on the faucet. I splashed the cold water onto my face. It felt shocking against the heated latex skin, but it did nothing. The smoky eyeshadow didn't run. The sharp eyeliner didn't smudge. The red lipstick remained a perfect, glossy slash of color. I grabbed the bar of soap and began to scrub, rubbing it harshly against my cheeks, my eyelids, my lips. The soap lathered, but when I rinsed it away, the makeup was still there, as pristine and untouched as a painting behind glass. It was like scrubbing a tattoo. It was part of me. I broke down completely. I slid down the wall to the cold tile floor, a heap of glossy leopard print and despair. I was chrysalis and butterfly, all at once, and the transformation was a horror story. I was buried alive inside this body, this walking, breathing fetish doll. There was no zipper. There was no escape. The sound that filled the small bathroom wasn't a scream of terror anymore. It was a low, guttural wail of absolute, hopeless grief. It was the sound of a man mourning his own death, even as his heart continued to beat within a stranger's chest. The reflection in the vanity showed a beautiful, exotic creature crying, but the tears were invisible, trapped behind a mask that had become a face, shed by a man who had become a monster. This seamless curse was my new reality, and the four walls of my bathroom felt like the edges of my tomb. I don't know how long I sat on the bathroom floor, a crumpled heap of despair. Hours, maybe. Time had lost all meaning. My world had shrunk to the cold tiles beneath me and the suffocating heat of my own body. But eventually, a primal, biological need pierced through the fog of my misery thirst. My throat was parched, my mouth as dry as dust. The thought of getting up, of moving this alien body, was exhausting, but the need for water was undeniable. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up. My muscles ached, and my feet screamed in protest from being locked in the heels for so long. Every movement was a chore, a negotiation with a body that refused to cooperate in familiar ways. Walking to the kitchen felt like crossing a continent. The clack, clack, squeak, clack of my steps was a mocking rhythm, a constant reminder of my predicament. I got a glass from the cabinet, a clumsy operation with these long nails, and filled it with tap water. The hood was a problem. It had no mouth opening, just the painted-on lips. In a fit of desperate frustration, I simply pressed the rim of the glass against the lips and tipped it back. The water ran over the smooth latex, cascading down my chin and chest, with only a few drops managing to seep through whatever strange permeable quality the material had. It wasn't enough. A new, more practical kind of despair set in. How was I supposed to eat to drink? Was I going to starve to death in this rubber shell? Just then, I heard a sound from outside my apartment door. Footsteps, followed by a series of sharp knocks. Knock, knock, knock. My blood ran cold. Someone was here. "Alex, you in there, buddy?" It was Mark, my neighbor from across the hall. Mark, with his goofy grin, his obsession with fantasy football, and his habit of borrowing my tools and never returning them. He was the last person in the world I wanted to see. "Everything okay?" His voice came again, muffled through the door. "Heard a big crash earlier. Just wanted to make sure you didn't, fall or something." He must have heard me when I stumbled and knocked over a lamp. My mind raced. I couldn't answer. If I spoke, he'd hear this new, high-pitched voice. I couldn't open the door. He'd see this. My instinct was to stay silent, to pretend I wasn't home. I held my breath, standing frozen in the middle of my living room. "Alex, come on, man, don't ignore me. Your car is in the lot. I know you're in there." A pause. "Look, if you don't answer, I'm calling the building manager. I'm serious." He was right. He was just being a good neighbor. If I didn't answer, he'd eventually get someone to open the door, and I'd be discovered anyway. Maybe I could open it just a crack. Tell him I was sick. But what would I say? What voice would I use? My heart hammered against my corset. There was no good option. Trapped between the certainty of being discovered later and the terrifying immediacy of being discovered now. I chose the latter. At least I could control the encounter, sort of. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I wobbled to the door. My hand, slick with a nervous sweat that was trapped inside the latex glove, trembled as it reached for the doorknob. I unlocked the deadbolt, the click sounding like a gunshot in the silent apartment. I pulled the door open just a few inches, peering through the crack, trying to keep most of my body hidden. Mark was standing there, a look of concern on his face. He was in his usual weekend attire, a worn-out band t-shirt and cargo shorts. He opened his mouth to speak, saw me, and then froze. His jaw went slack, his eyes widened, first in confusion, and then in a kind of stunned, dumbfounded admiration. He wasn't looking at me with concern anymore. He was looking at me the way a man looks at a beautiful, intriguing woman. His gaze swept from my cat-eared head down to the sliver of leopard print latex he could see, and then back up to my masked face. "Whoa," he breathed, a slow smile spreading across his face. Sorry, I think I have the wrong apartment. I was looking for Alec." My throat was tight. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, my heart pounding a deafening rhythm in my ears. "Is he home?" Mark asked, his voice a little softer, a little more charming than I was used to. He was trying to flirt with me. I gave a small, jerky shake of my head. It was the only response I could manage. "Oh, okay." He seemed disappointed, but his eyes were still twinkling with curiosity. He leaned against the doorframe, making no move to leave. "Well, in that case, I'm Mark. I live across the hall." He gestured with his thumb. I just stared at him from behind my mask, my mind a blank slate of panic. You new here visiting Alex," he pressed, his smile widening, "because I definitely would have remembered seeing you around." The compliment, so casual and reflexive on his part, landed like a physical blow. He thought I was attractive. He saw this thing, and his first instinct was to be charmed by it. The absurdity of it was staggering. Here I was, Alex, his neighbor, his buddy, trapped in a waking nightmare, and he was trying to pick me up. A strange hot feeling bloomed in my cheeks, a blush I could feel but he couldn't see. It was a humiliating, confusing mix of shame and a tiny treacherous flicker of something else, validation flattery. The idea was so repulsive I wanted to slam the door in his face. I shook my head again, more insistently this time, and made a move to close the door. "Hey, wait," he said, holding up a hand. "Look, sorry if I'm being forward. You look incredible. That's a hell of an outfit." He let out a low whistle. "Seriously, wow." My hand froze on the door. Incredible. He thought this prison was incredible. He saw a sexy, confident woman in a wild costume, not a terrified man being suffocated by his own skin. The disconnect between his reality and mine was a chasm wide enough to swallow me whole. I couldn't take any more. I gave him one last, desperate shake of the head and pushed the door shut, clicking the lock back into place. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, my body trembling from the encounter. I could hear him on the other side. Okay, message received. It was nice meeting you. Mystery cat lady," he called out, his voice full of amused laughter. Then I heard his footsteps as he walked away. I slid down to the floor, my legs giving out from under me. The world outside my apartment, the world of normal people like Mark, saw this new form not as a horror, but as a spectacle, an object of curiosity, an object of desire. The thought was both revolting and deeply, profoundly unsettling. My identity, my very self was invisible. All anyone would ever see now was the woman in the latex and a part of me, a tiny, traitorous, shameful part. had shivered not just with fear but with a strange and terrifying thrill at the look in his eyes. The encounter with Mark left me reeling for the rest of the day. I paced my apartment like a caged animal, a sleek, leopard print animal in 6-inch heels. The small space that had once been my sanctuary now felt like a prison cell, and I was its only bizarre inmate. My thirst had become a torment, my hunger a dull ache in my cinched stomach. The brief, humiliating attempt to drink from a glass had shown me that basic survival was now a complex problem. Desperate, I found a box of juice pouches in the back of my pantry, leftovers from a niece's visit. After fumbling with the straw for 5 minutes, I managed to pierce the foil. I jammed the straw against my painted lips, and to my immense relief, the material was porous enough to let the liquid slowly seep through. It was a slow, inefficient process, but it was life-sustaining. I drank 3 pouches in a row, the sugary apple juice doing little to quench my thirst, but keeping dehydration at bay. As dusk settled outside my window, casting long shadows across my living room, a new kind of anxiety began to set in, the anxiety of isolation. I was completely alone with this new, horrifying self. My phone sat on the coffee table, a useless black rectangle. Who could I call? What could I possibly say? Hey, Mom, funny story. 911. Yes, I'd like to report a stolen body, and the thief is me. The silence of the apartment pressed in on me, amplifying the sound of my own squeaking movements. I had to do something. I had to get out. Not to escape. I knew that was impossible now, but just to be in the world, to feel something other than the 4 walls of my apartment closing in. The idea was insane. Walking outside, in public, like this, after the mortifying encounter with Mark. But the alternative, sitting here, alone in the dark, slowly going mad, seemed even worse. It took me an hour to build up the courage. I practiced walking, moving from the living room to the kitchen and back, trying to master the unnatural gait forced upon me by the heels. It was a strange rolling motion of the hips, a delicate placement of one foot directly in front of the other. It felt performative, absurd, but after a while, a clumsy rhythm started to emerge. Finally, with my heart pounding a nervous rhythm that felt like it might tear through my latex skin, I unlocked my door and stepped out into the hallway. The air outside my apartment was cool, and it felt wonderful against my overheated body. The hallway was empty. So far, so good. I made my way to the elevator, my heels making sharp, loud clicks on the linoleum floor. Every sound felt amplified, a declaration of my presence. Look at me, look at the freak. Inside the elevator, I was confronted with my reflection again in the polished steel doors. The woman staring back at me looked powerful. The harsh overhead lighting glinted off the glossy latex, highlighting every curve. The cat ears stood at attention, and the painted face was a mask of cold, unreadable confidence. It was a complete illusion. Inside, I was a terrified mess, a puddle of anxiety. But the outside was a fortress. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby. A couple was waiting to get on. A man and a woman in their late 50s. They both did a double take when they saw me. The woman's eyes widened, and she gave her husband a subtle nudge. The man just stared, his mouth slightly agape. They stepped into the elevator without a word, their eyes following me until the doors slid shut. I didn't know what their stares meant: judgment, amusement, shock. But they had an effect on me. I felt my posture straighten. The corset and heels already forced me into an upright, commanding stance. But now I felt myself consciously inhabiting it. If they were going to stare, I wouldn't give them a frightened, trembling creature to look at. I would give them the Catwoman. I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the night. The city was alive. Cars streamed by, their headlights washing over me. People milled about on the sidewalk, and for a moment, I was just another person in the urban landscape. Then the first head turned, and another, and another. A group of college-age guys walking past fell silent, their conversation dying as they all turned to stare. One of them let out a low whistle. A woman walking her dog pulled the leash a little tighter, steering her pet in a wide arc around me. Every pair of eyes felt like a physical touch, but the reaction was different from what I'd expected. I had braced myself for ridicule, for laughter, for disgust, and while there were certainly some confused and judgmental looks, The overwhelming reaction was one of fascination, awe, even admiration. My walk took me to a small 24-hour convenience store a few blocks from my apartment. I needed food, even if I didn't know how I was going to eat it. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and I stepped into the bright, sterile light. The clerk, a bored-looking teenager slouched behind the counter, sat bolt upright, his eyes as wide as dinner plates. I ignored him and made my way down an aisle. My heels clicking on the cheap linoleum, I grabbed a protein bar and a bottle of water, items that seemed easiest to manage. As I turned to head to the counter, I almost collided with a man who had been stocking shelves. He was tall, with a kind face and tired eyes. "Oh, excuse me, ma'am," he said, stepping back quickly. Ma'am. He had called me ma'am. It was such a normal, everyday word, but hearing it directed at me sent a bizarre jolt through my system. I just nodded, unable to speak. "That's an amazing costume," he said with a genuine, friendly smile. "You going to a party?" Again, I just nodded. It was the easiest lie. "Well, you're definitely going to win Best Dressed," he said with a little laugh, then went back to his work. I walked to the counter and placed my items down. The teenage clerk was still staring, a look of slack-jawed wonder on his face. I pulled a credit card from a tiny hidden pocket I discovered in the seam of the suit near my hip. My old wallet was useless now. As I handed it to him, our fingers brushed. His touch was hesitant, almost reverent, and at that point of contact, a strange energy passed between us. I felt a jolt, a flicker of awareness. He wasn't touching a monster. He was touching a woman he found unbelievably attractive. I saw it in his eyes, in the faint blush that crept up his neck. He fumbled with the card, his hands shaking slightly. He ran the transaction in silence, then handed it back to me. "Here you go, miss," he stammered. "Miss, first ma'am, now miss." These simple, gendered words were redefining me in the eyes of the world. They saw the shell, and the shell was female. I took my bag and walked out, the little bell above the door announcing my departure. Back on the street, the night air felt different. The stares of strangers no longer felt like accusations. They felt like attention, the kind of attention I had never once received in my life as Alex, an average, unremarkable man. This body, this prison, commanded a reaction. It drew the eye. It sparked imagination and desire. I was still terrified. I was still mourning the man I had lost. But as I walked home, the rhythmic clack-clack of my heels on the pavement sounded less like a death march and more like a strange, new heartbeat. A part of me, a part I was deeply ashamed of, was starting to get used to the attention. It was a dangerous, seductive poison, and I could feel it starting to seep into my veins. The Catwoman wasn't just a shell anymore. She was an identity, and the world was all too willing to accept her. The next few days passed in a surreal haze. My life became a series of small, strange rituals. I learned to sleep on my back to avoid putting too much pressure on the corset. I discovered that I could consume liquids and semi-solids like yogurt or soup by patiently pressing the container to my lips and letting the substance slowly absorb through the mask. It was a bizarre, animalistic way to live, but I was adapting. I was surviving. I established a routine. I'd spend the daylight hours in my apartment, a prisoner of my own home, watching the world go by through my window. But when night fell, a strange restlessness would take hold of me. The Catwoman wanted out. My nightly walks became longer, more ambitious. I explored my neighborhood with a new and foreign perspective. I was no longer Alex, the guy who power walked for exercise in gray sweatpants. I was a mysterious, silent woman in leopard print latex and 6-inch heels. My movements were slow, deliberate, a glide punctuated by the click of my heels. I learned to navigate the cracked sidewalks and uneven curbs with a grace that surprised me. The attention was constant. It became a kind of background noise, a hum of turned heads, whispers, and unabashed stares. I never spoke, never made eye contact. I was a phantom, an urban legend in the making. My silence and my appearance created an aura of mystery that people seemed to find irresistible. Men would try to talk to me, offering to buy me a drink, asking for my name. I would simply shake my head and continue on my way, leaving them staring after me, intrigued and confused. This strange double life was taking its toll on my sanity. In the apartment, I was Alex, trapped and grieving. I'd look at my old photos, my men's clothes hanging uselessly in the closet, and feel a profound sense of loss. But outside, in the dark, under the city lights, I was starting to feel something else. A sense of power. This body, this curse, gave me an influence over people I'd never had before. A glance could stop a man in his tracks. My silence could make people lean in, desperate to know my secrets. It was on one of these walks, about a week after my transformation, that I saw Mark again. I was heading back to my building, the cool night air a welcome relief. He was just getting out of his car, juggling a bag of groceries. He saw me approaching from down the street, and he stopped, waiting for me to get closer. "Hey there, mystery cat lady," he said with that same easy, charming grin from before. "Fancy meeting you here." My first instinct was to just walk past him, to give a dismissive nod and disappear into the safety of the building. But I stopped. I don't know why. Maybe I was tired of being a ghost. I just stood there on the sidewalk, a few feet away from him, and tilted my head. "Not much of a talker, are you?" he chuckled, shifting the grocery bag in his arms. "That's okay. I can talk enough for both of us." He looked me up and down, his gaze appreciative but not leering. It was genuinely admiring. "You know, I've been thinking about you. It's not every day a woman like you moves into the building." "A woman like me," the phrase echoed in my head. "I was starting to think I imagined you." He continued, "But here you are. Look, I know this is forward, and you're probably on your way somewhere important. But would you let me buy you a coffee sometime, or a drink? I'd really love to get to know the woman behind the mask." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. He wasn't just trying a cheap pickup line. He was genuinely curious. He saw a person, not just an outfit, a person he perceived as a woman. My mind was screaming at me, "Say no. Walk away. This is insane. He's your neighbor. He thinks you're a woman." But my body did something else. I took a small step forward, then slowly. I lifted my hand and gave him a small, hesitant wave. It was the first truly interactive gesture I had made since this all began. Mark's face lit up. "Is that a maybe?" he asked, his voice hopeful. I didn't know what it was. It was a crack in my resolve, a moment of weakness, a desperate, lonely impulse to connect with another human being, even if the connection was based on a complete and utter lie. I gave a slow, deliberate nod. His grin was huge now. "Yes, okay, great, wow." He seemed genuinely thrilled. Can I get your number?" My number, my phone, my old life. The logistics of the lie suddenly came crashing down on me. I couldn't give him my number. He'd text Alex's number and be confused. I couldn't speak to him on the phone. I shook my head, my gesture more frantic this time. "Oh," he said, his face falling slightly. "Right, the silent, mysterious thing. I get it." He thought for a moment. "Okay, how about this? I'm usually home in the evenings if you ever feel like that coffee. Just knock on my door, 4B, anytime." He gave me one last, hopeful smile. "Seriously, I'll be waiting." He hoisted his groceries and headed into the building, leaving me alone on the sidewalk, my mind a war zone of conflicting emotions. I had just in my own silent way agreed to a date with my neighbor as a woman. The part of me that was still Alex was screaming in protest, horrified by the tangled web I was weaving. I was a liar, a fraud. This was a cruel deception. But another part of me, the part that was getting stronger every day, the part that was starting to merge with the Catwoman persona, felt a terrifying, exhilarating flutter in my chest. For the first time, someone had looked past the shocking exterior and tried to connect with the person inside. The tragic irony was that the person he wanted to connect with didn't really exist. Or maybe she was starting to. I walked into the building, my thoughts racing. For the first time, I felt a conflict that wasn't just about my body, but about my identity. Was I Alex, the man trapped inside? Or was I becoming this silent, mysterious woman that the world saw as I rode the elevator up to my floor? My reflection in the steel door seemed to watch me with a knowing, challenging look in her smoky eyes. The mask was no longer just hiding my old face. It was starting to become a new one. 2 nights later, I found myself standing in front of apartment 4B. I had been arguing with myself for 48 straight hours. One voice, the voice of Alex, screamed that this was the stupidest, most dangerous idea I had ever had. What are you going to do, Alex? Sit there in silence while he talks. What happens when he asks a question you can't answer with a nod? What happens if he tries to touch you to kiss you? But the other voice, a softer, more persuasive whisper that sounded suspiciously like the Catwoman, had a counter-argument. What's the alternative? Sit alone in your apartment for the rest of your life. He's just offering coffee. He's kind. He sees you. Don't you want to be seen? That last question was the one that broke my resolve. The loneliness was a physical ache, a cold hollowness that even the tight corset couldn't fill. I craved human connection, even a flawed, deceptive one, like a man in a desert craves water. So here I was. My latex-gloved hand was raised, hovering just inches from the wood of Mark's door. It was trembling. I was wearing my only outfit, the full leopard print catsuit, the corset, the heels. It felt absurd to be dressed for a fetish club just to have coffee with a neighbor. But I had no choice. This was my skin. This was my life. Taking a breath that did little to calm my racing heart, I knocked, 3 soft taps. I heard movement inside, and then the door swung open. Mark stood there, and his face broke into a wide, genuinely happy smile when he saw me. "You came," he said, his voice warm. "I was hoping you would, but I wasn't sure. Please, come in." He stepped aside, and I walked into his apartment. It was the mirror image of my own, but it felt completely different. It was messy, lived in. A video game controller sat on the coffee table next to a stack of comic books. A guitar leaned against the wall. It was so unapologetically him, and it made my own sterile, lonely apartment feel even more like a prison cell. "Can I get you something? I've got coffee brewing. Or I have tea, water, soda, you name it." I pointed towards the coffee maker on his counter, which was gurgling happily. "Coffee it is," he said, grabbing 2 mugs from a cabinet, black cream and sugar. I held up 2 fingers, then mimed stirring, hoping he'd understand I wanted cream and sugar. He did. 2 sugars and some cream. Got it. He moved around his kitchen with an easy, comfortable energy. As he prepared the coffee, he kept talking, filling the silence I couldn't. "So, I've got to be honest, I'm insanely curious about you," he said, not looking at me, which somehow made it easier. "The outfit is obviously a statement. Are you a performer, an artist, or do you just have a really cool sense of style?" I just stood in the middle of his living room, unsure of what to do with my hands, my body. He turned and handed me a warm mug. I took it, my gloved fingers wrapping around the ceramic. The heat was a pleasant, grounding sensation. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to," he added quickly. Seeing my lack of response, "I'm sorry. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. We can just sit, enjoy the coffee." He led the way to his small, worn-out sofa and sat down, patting the cushion next to him, hesitantly. I sat perching on the edge. The movement was awkward in the heels and corset. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the soft hum of his refrigerator. He took a sip of his coffee. I brought my own mug to my lips, pressing it against the mask and letting the warm, sweet liquid slowly seep through. It was a slow, strange way to drink, and I felt self-conscious. But Mark didn't comment. He just watched me with a look of gentle curiosity. "You have beautiful eyes," he said suddenly, his voice soft. The compliment landed with a jolt. He was looking at me so intently, trying to see past the makeup, past the mask. He was trying to see me. A hot blush crept up my neck. I quickly looked down at the mug in my hands. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I'm making you nervous. I've never met anyone like you. You're this incredible enigma. You walk with such confidence, but right now you seem shy." He was right. The Catwoman persona I adopted for my walks was a shield, a performance. Here, in the quiet intimacy of his apartment, the shield was gone. I was just Alex, terrified and out of my depth, trapped in a body that projected an image I couldn't live up to. He reached out, his movement slow, and gently placed his hand over mine, where it rested on my knee. His skin was warm and slightly rough against the slick, cool latex of my glove. "It's okay," he said softly. "You don't have to say anything. I'm glad you're here." His touch was electric. It wasn't aggressive or demanding. It was just kind, a simple human connection. My heart hammered against my ribs. My mind was a screaming chaos of panic and confusion. But my body relaxed, just a fraction. The tension in my shoulders eased. My breathing, which had been shallow and tight, deepened slightly. We sat like that for what felt like an eternity, his hand resting on mine, the warmth of his touch seeping through the latex barrier. He didn't push. He just let the silence stretch, making it comfortable instead of awkward. He told me about his day, about a funny thing that happened at work, about a movie he had watched. He spoke to me as if I were a normal person, a normal woman, having coffee with him on a Tuesday night. And for a few fleeting moments, I almost felt like one. The lines were blurring. The voice of Alex, the man, was growing fainter, drowned out by the quiet reality of this moment, in this room with this man. I wasn't a freak or a monster. I was a beautiful, mysterious woman, and it felt good. It felt dangerously, terrifyingly good. I left Mark's apartment an hour later in a daze. Our time together had been surprisingly normal. We'd finished our coffee. He had shown me his collection of vintage comic books. At the door, he had simply smiled and said, "I hope you'll come over again soon." There was no pressure, no expectation, just a simple, open invitation. As I walked the few steps across the hall to my own apartment, my mind was spinning. The experience had been both terrifying and intoxicating. The kindness in his eyes, the warmth of his hand on mine, it had awakened a longing for connection that I had been ruthlessly suppressing. He had treated me like a person, a woman, and my body, this traitorous body, had responded to his gentle attention with a warmth that had nothing to do with the insulating latex. I locked my door behind me and leaned against it, my eyes closed. Who was I becoming? The lines I had drawn between Alex the prisoner and the Catwoman shell were dissolving. The shell had sat on a sofa and shared a quiet moment with a man. The shell had felt shy and then comforted. The shell was developing a life of its own, and it was dragging me along for the ride. I walked into my bathroom and flipped on the light, just as I had on that first, horrifying morning. I stood in front of the vanity and stared at my reflection. The same creature stared back at me, the glossy leopard print skin, the perky cat ears, the impossibly cinched waist, the face a perfect mask of makeup. But something was different. The terror in her eyes, the sheer, animalistic panic was gone. It had been replaced by something quieter, more complex, confusion, sadness, and a flicker of something I couldn't name. Resignation, curiosity. I looked at me for a long time. I saw the body that had made men on the street whistle in appreciation. I saw the eyes that Mark had called beautiful. I saw the painted lips that had sipped coffee from a mug while a kind man talked about his day. This wasn't just a prison anymore. It was becoming my reality, my identity. Every day that I lived like this, every interaction I had, every stare I received, solidified this form as my own. The man named Alex, with his baggy jeans and his 5 o'clock shadow and his deep voice, was fading. He was becoming a ghost, a memory. His clothes still hung in the closet, but they looked like they belonged to a stranger. All my desperate struggles, my panicked attempts to find a zipper, to wash off the makeup, seemed like a lifetime ago. I had been trying to fight a battle that was already lost. You can't escape your own skin. My reflection's gaze was steady, unwavering. There was a challenge in it. And what now, she seemed to ask. Are you going to spend the rest of your life grieving for a man who no longer exists? Or are you going to start living as the woman you are? A profound, weary sadness washed over me, but it wasn't the frantic despair of before. It was a quieter, deeper sorrow, an acceptance of a great and terrible loss, the death of my old self. I raised a hand and gently touched the face in the mirror. My red-nailed fingers traced the high cheekbone, the sharp line of the eyeliner, the curve of the scarlet lip. For the first time, the face didn't feel entirely alien. It felt familiar. It was the face the world saw. It was the face Mark saw. A single silent thought formed in my mind, clear and sharp as a shard of glass. He likes her. He wants to see her again. My old self, Alex, would be horrified. He would be disgusted by the deception. But Alex wasn't the one sitting on that couch. Alex wasn't the one whose hand he held. I was. My throat felt tight. I opened my mouth, wanting to say something, to speak my old name one last time, to rage against this fate, but no sound came out. Instead, I just breathed, a long, slow, shuddering breath. I looked into the eyes of the woman in the glass, my eyes, and saw not a stranger, but a reflection of a new and terrifying truth. The fight was over. Leaning closer to the mirror, until my breath fogged the glass, I whispered the words that sealed my fate. The voice was hers, not mine, a soft, resigned soprano. This is me now. The woman in the mirror didn't look away. Her expression didn't change, but I could have sworn, just for a second, that I saw the corner of her perfect, painted lips curve into the slightest hint of a smile. The transformation was complete. The grieving was over. A new life was about to begin.